You already know this feeling. Not the loneliness of being alone in a room. Not the loneliness of having nobody to call. Something more specific than that. Something that arrived not when your life emptied out, but when it was fullest. When you were surrounded by people who knew your name and laughed at your jokes and thought they understood you completely. And you sat there and felt it anyway. The specific loneliness of being inside a process that nobody around you can see. Of becoming something you do not yet have words for. While the people closest to you keep relating to the version of you that is already gone. You did not choose this feeling, it chose you. And the moment it arrived, you probably did two things. You tried to explain it to someone who could not quite hear what you were saying, and then you went quiet, because explaining it made it worse, because the gap between what you were trying to say and what they were able to receive was itself the loneliness. Carl Jung spent 40 years trying to understand what that feeling actually is, where it comes from, what it is doing to you while you are inside it, and why the people who never go through it never become who they were actually capable of being. This video is about that feeling, what it means, what it costs, and what it is quietly building inside you while you are convinced it is destroying you. In 1913, Carl Jung lost the most important relationship of his life. Not a romantic relationship, not a family member. The intellectual relationship that had defined his entire professional identity for 6 years, his friendship and collaboration with Sigmund Freud. Freud had called Jung his crown prince, his chosen successor, the man who would carry the psychoanalytic movement forward after Freud was gone. For 6 years, they exchanged over 300 letters. They travelled together. They built something together. And then Jung started thinking for himself, not out of ambition, not out of rivalry, out of honest intellectual disagreement that he could no longer suppress without betraying what he actually believed. Freud believed the unconscious was a repository of repressed sexual drives. Jung believed it was something older and larger than that, something inherited across all human beings regardless of their personal history, something he would eventually call the collective unconscious. He told Freud. Freud could not accept it. The correspondence became strained, then cold, then it stopped entirely. In 1913, they met for the last time at a conference in Munich. They did not speak privately. They did not reconcile. Jung watched the man who had believed in him more than anyone else in his professional life look through him as if he were no longer there. They never spoke again. Now here is what you need to understand about that moment. Jung did not lose Freud because he failed. He lost Freud because he succeeded. Because he followed his own thinking to a place Freud could not follow. Because he chose what he actually believed over the relationship that validated him. The loneliness arrived at the exact moment he became more himself. That is not a coincidence. That is the pattern. And you have felt some version of it already. The friendship that cooled when you stopped being the person they needed you to be. The relationship that struggled when you started wanting something different. The family dynamic that shifted when you began asking questions the people around you had decided not to ask. The loneliness that appears before you become yourself is not a malfunction. It is the first sign that something real is beginning. But you have to go through what Jung went through next to understand why. After the break with Freud, Jung did not immediately produce his next great work. He fell apart. For 3 years, he could barely function. He resigned from his position at the University of Zurich. He stopped publishing. He withdrew from the professional world almost entirely. From the outside, it looked like a breakdown. From the inside, it was something more deliberate and more terrifying than a breakdown. Jung chose to go in. Every night he sat at his desk and wrote. Not theory, not clinical observations. He wrote what he saw when he closed his eyes and let the unconscious speak without editing it. Visions, dreams, figures emerging from his own psyche with names and voices and things to tell him. An old man named Philemon who appeared in his imagination and spoke with a wisdom that felt distinctly separate from Jung's own conscious mind. He wrote it all down. He illustrated it. He bound it in red leather. He called it the Red Book, Liber Novus, the New Book. He showed it to almost nobody. He never published it during his lifetime. It sat in a bank vault for decades after his death, before his family finally allowed it to be seen. Think about what that means. The most important psychological document of the 20th century, written in complete isolation by a man who had no guarantee that what he was doing was meaningful and not simply madness, who had lost his most important intellectual relationship, who had no institutional position to return to, who sat alone every night with the contents of his own unconscious and wrote it down for an audience of no one. That is the Red Book. And here is what Jung said about those 3 years afterward. He said everything he produced for the rest of his life grew out of that period. The collective unconscious, the archetypes, the shadow, individuation, the entire architecture of analytical psychology. All of it came from 3 years alone in the dark, writing for nobody. The loneliness was not the interruption to the work. The loneliness was where the work was built. Jung was precise about this. Individuation, the process of becoming the person you actually are, cannot be done in company. Not because solitude is inherently virtuous, but because the process requires something that the presence of other people makes almost impossible. It requires you to stop performing. From the moment you were old enough to understand that other people had expectations of you, you began constructing a self that could meet those expectations. Jung called it the persona, the mask. Not a deception exactly, more like a necessary adaptation. The version of you that could function in the social world, maintain relationships, hold a position, be understood. The persona is not the enemy. It kept you safe. It made you legible to the people around you. But it is not you. And at a certain point in a person's life, if they are paying attention, the gap between the persona and the actual self becomes impossible to ignore. You feel it as a kind of friction. The life that looks right from the outside, feeling wrong from the inside. The relationships that should be satisfying, leaving you strangely empty. The achievements that were supposed to mean something, meaning less than you thought they would. That friction is the self trying to make itself known beneath the performance. And here is why it has to be lonely. The people around you are relating to the persona. They have built their understanding of you, their expectations of you, their relationship with you, entirely on the surface you have been presenting. When the surface begins to shift, they do not experience it as your growth. They experience it as instability, as distance, as you becoming someone they do not recognize. They are not wrong to feel that. You are changing. The person they knew is dissolving. Something they cannot yet see is replacing it. The loneliness of that period is the gap between who you are becoming and who the people around you are still relating to. You cannot close that gap by explaining it. You can only move through it. In 1914, Jung wrote in his diary that he felt as if he were living in a cloud, disconnected from the world he had previously inhabited, present in his daily life, but fundamentally elsewhere. Not depressed exactly, suspended, as if the old identity had dissolved and the new one had not yet arrived to take its place. That suspension is the loneliness, and it is the necessary condition for what comes next. You have probably already felt the first signs of this, the conversation where you caught yourself saying something you did not mean, because it was what the room expected. The relationship where you performed a version of yourself so consistently that you forgot it was a performance. The version of your life you constructed so carefully that it fits perfectly on paper and sits slightly wrong in your body. At some point, the persona stops holding. Not dramatically, not with a single breaking moment. It happens in accumulation. One small dishonesty at a time. One suppressed instinct at a time. One morning at a time where you wake up and the face you're about to put on for the day feels slightly heavier than it did the week before. Jung watched this happen in his patients for decades. The person who had been the reliable one, the successful one, the composed one, arriving in his office in their 40s or 50s with the specific crisis of someone whose performance had finally exhausted them. Not because anything had gone wrong externally, because everything had gone right, and it still was not enough. He called it the midlife crisis before that phrase existed, but he understood it differently from how the culture understands it now. The culture reads the midlife crisis as a malfunction, a regression, a desperate attempt to recover youth. Jung read it as an invitation. The persona falls apart, not because you failed to maintain it, but because you succeeded so completely that there is nothing left to achieve within it. The self underneath it has been patient long enough. It begins to push through. The pushing feels like crisis. It feels like loss. It feels like the loneliness of watching a version of yourself that you worked very hard to build, beginning to dissolve. But here's what Jung understood that most people in that moment do not. The dissolving is not the end of something. It is the beginning of the only thing that was ever actually yours. What emerges in the loneliness is not comfortable. Jung called it the shadow. Everything you suppressed in the construction of the persona. Every instinct you decided was unacceptable. Every desire you buried because the people around you could not accommodate it. Every part of yourself that did not fit the version you were presenting to the world. The shadow is not evil. That is the most common misunderstanding of Jung's work. It is simply everything that did not make the edit. The ambition you decided was arrogance. The anger you converted into compliance. The creative impulse you buried under practicality. The version of yourself that wanted something completely different from the life you are currently living, and was told, directly or indirectly, that wanting it was inappropriate. All of it went somewhere. It did not disappear. It went underground. And in the loneliness that precedes becoming, it starts coming back up. This is why the period feels so destabilizing. You are not just losing the persona, you are meeting what was underneath it. And what was underneath it has been waiting for a long time. Jung's own shadow confrontation during the Red Book period was extreme. The figures he encountered in his visions were not gentle. They were demanding and strange and sometimes frightening. He wrote about a figure he called Salome, blind and seductive, about the old wise man Philemon, who knew things Jung did not know, about voices and images that emerged from depths he had not previously accessed. He did not pathologize any of it. He sat with it. He wrote it down. He tried to understand what each figure was telling him about the parts of himself he had suppressed in the construction of the respectable professional identity he had built and then lost. The shadow appearing is not a sign that you are falling apart. It is a sign that the parts of you that were not allowed in the performance are finally getting their turn. And what you do with them is the whole question. This is the section nobody tells you about. Not everyone survives your becoming. Some of the people in your life were there because of who you were performing. They needed the reliable one, the agreeable one, the one who never asked for too much or pushed back too hard or wanted something inconvenient. They built their relationship with the persona, not with the person beneath it. When the persona dissolves, they experience it as abandonment, as betrayal, as you becoming someone selfish or unstable or difficult. They will say things like, "You have changed," and they will say it as an accusation. They are right. You have changed. That is the point. Jung lost Freud. He lost colleagues who sided with Freud after the break. He lost his academic position. He lost the professional identity that had defined him for a decade, and he sat with what remained. What remained was his family, his private practice, and the contents of his own unconscious, waiting to be explored. That is what the stripping away leaves you with. Not nothing, the essential things. The relationships that were built on something real enough to survive the transformation. The work that was actually yours, the version of your life that does not require a performance to sustain it. But you cannot know what survives until you go through the losing. That is the specific grief of this period. You cannot protect the relationships that are real by refusing to become. You can only delay the moment of finding out which ones were real. Jung understood this with a precision that came from living it. He wrote that the development of the personality is a risk, and that everything great and good in the life of a human being had its beginning in the experience of being alone with oneself. Not alone eventually, alone first. The loneliness is not what you endure until the becoming is complete. It is what the becoming is made of. While you're inside it, the loneliness feels like absence, like something has been taken, like the life you had, the relationships that held it, the identity that organized it, are dissolving without anything visible arriving to replace them. But Jung understood what is actually happening in that space. The loneliness is doing three things simultaneously. It is clear in the noise. The constant negotiation of the social self, the management of other people's perceptions, the energy spent maintaining the persona, all of it quiets in the loneliness. For possibly the first time in years, you can hear yourself think without the interference of who you are supposed to be. It is surfacing the real, the desires, instincts and capacities that were suppressed in the construction of the persona begin to emerge when the performance pressure lifts. The loneliness is not empty. It is full of everything that did not have room to exist when you were busy being who everyone needed you to be. It is building the foundation. Jung spent 3 years in the Red Book period, producing nothing visible. No papers, no lectures, no professional output. But everything he built afterward rested on what those 3 years produced internally. The loneliness was not a pause in the construction. It was where the deepest foundations were laid. You are not wasting time in the loneliness. You are doing the most important work of your life in a format that produces no external evidence of its own progress. That is the most disorienting thing about it. The world measures progress in visible outputs. The individuation process produces nothing visible for a very long time. It produces an internal reorganization that will eventually express itself in everything you do, every relationship you have, every decision you make. But while you are inside it, there is no proof it is working. You simply have to continue. Jung continued, 3 years in the dark, writing for nobody. And then he emerged and spent the next 40 years producing the body of work that would reshape our understanding of the human psyche. The loneliness built that. Here is what Jung would tell you directly. The loneliness that appears before you become yourself is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is the most reliable sign that something has finally gone right. The people who never feel it are the people who never went deep enough to find the gap between who they were performing and who they actually were. They maintained the persona until the end. They were never alone in the way that produces something real. They were surrounded by people who related to a surface that was never quite them. You already know which kind of life that produces. You have watched it in the people around you, the quiet disappointment of someone who played it safe and called it wisdom. The loneliness is the alternative. It is the cost of the direction, the price of becoming specific enough that casual company can no longer reach you, the necessary condition of arriving at a self that is actually yours, rather than a collaborative construction assembled from other people's expectations. Jung never fully resolved the loneliness. He integrated it. He built a life spacious enough to contain both the deep solitude of the individuation process and the genuine connections that survived it. He walked in the mountains. He carved stone at his tower in Bollingen. He sat alone with the contents of his own psyche for the rest of his life and continued to find things worth writing down. He did not become less lonely by becoming more himself. He became more capable of being alone without it being suffering. That is the destination, not the end of the loneliness, the transformation of it. From something that feels like loss into something that feels like the most honest relationship you have ever had. The relationship with yourself. That is what appears on the other side of the loneliness that appears before you become yourself. Not arrival, not resolution, not the life you imagined when you started. Something more specific than that. More yours than anything you have previously inhabited. If this is the kind of thinking you want more of, subscribe. This channel moves slowly and deliberately, but it goes deeper than most are willing to go. What did you lose when you started becoming yourself? Drop it below. Not the performed answer, the real one.